Greetings, my friends. For quite a long time already, I've had a certain fascination with the history of the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire. I tried to explain to myself why that is. It might have been nothing more than a continuation of my childhood interest in the history of ancient civilizations of Rome and Greece. After all, I grew up with such video games as Rome Total War, Empire Earth, Civilization, and others of this sort. I also enjoyed reading about these civilizations in different encyclopedias and history books. One might say that Byzantium, being both Roman and Greek, inevitably should have captured my interest at some point. But that is simply not the case. Quite the opposite, frankly. The Eastern Roman Empire and its history were of very little interest to me in my younger years. Being quite a progressive and liberal young lad, I considered this state an abomination, a representation of everything that was wrong about the Middle Ages, Christianity, traditional societies, and everything that was and still is wrong about the country in which I lived at that point. The country being Russia, of course. I was an atheist also, and a militant one for that matter. This surely didn't help with appreciation of a society that was highly religious and that followed a particularly conservative version of Christianity. It's like, everything about the ancient civilizations of Rome and Greece was bright and shiny. Democracy, freedom, expansion, scientific progress, cool-looking hoplites and legionaries. While everything about the Middle Ages was in my eyes dark and dim, and full of barbarity, corruption, authoritarianism, religious obscurantism, societal and scientific degradation, and so on and so forth. Yet somehow, with passage of time, with new experiences, new knowledge, newfound wisdom, so to speak, my whole worldview, in a sense, made a 180 degrees turn. Things that no more than 5 years ago I considered absolutely and inarguably good, today I learned to doubt and to criticize, while things that I irrationally hated and discarded, I grew to understand and appreciate. It was a long and arduous intellectual journey, which in many ways is still going on and probably will be going on until my very death. However, this journey is not the subject of this video. That will be more deeply pondered in one of the future ones, hopefully. What I want to talk about in this video is exactly why the traditional societies of Byzantium and other Christian peoples are so fascinating, and why I think that people of those societies were fundamentally happier and more satisfied with their lot in a spiritual sense. Why their lives were a lot more meaningful than the empty, senseless existence we currently succumb to. Why I think so despite the obvious fact that none of us, including myself, would want to replace his or her current circumstances with the ones our medieval ancestors lived in. Well, there are many fundamental differences between our modern society and the traditional societies of our ancestors. I can't even hope to include and discuss all of them in this video. All I can do is to try to grasp the most obvious ones and to show you why, despite our modern biases and prejudices, not all of these differences are in favor of modernity. One of the most basic differences is the hierarchical structure of any traditional society. Not just de facto, as it is in any society, including our modern one, but also de jure, i.e., in an idealistic, fundamental way of understanding and accepting one's place in the world. By that I mean that, unlike our current egalitarian mythology, according to which everyone is being born equal and theoretically capable of achieving any place and any position in a society, both vertically, as in going up or down the ranks, and horizontally, as in being able to change one's profession, the traditional societal mythology followed the idea of the great chain of being, according to which everyone has a particular place in the world, again, both vertically and horizontally. This meant that everyone was where he was not simply by chance or because of circumstances of one's birth or whatever random reason, but because he or she was destined to, because God willed it, because such was one's place and place of one's ancestors. In different places it had different degrees of implementation, different degrees of hardcoreness, so to speak. In certain places, such as India, it took a form of the caste system that allowed very little social mobility, if any at all. In places such as Byzantium, on the other hand, despite our modern prejudices, the old Roman republican meritocratic system still held some residual sway, and so it wasn't a rare thing for a low-born to become an emperor. Yet still, even there, the idea of the great chain of being was the main foundational narrative that held the society together. Social mobility was not a goal in itself. Even if changes in an individual station happened, they were more often the result of dedicated hard work on the part of the individual, his connections, or some unforeseen circumstances, rather than concentrated efforts on the part of the society. The other thing that differentiates us from our ancestors is the lack of religion, both in terms of societal norms and stigmas and in terms of personal belief. Your average medieval peasant maybe couldn't travel around the world, neither could I honestly for the whole last year. He couldn't purchase the most shiny and modern thing available or receive a painless treatment from a doctor. But he had something that most of us lack today, and what is probably a lot more important and meaningful than even the most expensive gaming PC or fancy car. He had certainty about this life and the next, not in a material sense, but in a spiritual one. He knew that his labor was important. He could find a wife and share a life with her, knowing that she wouldn't be a proper garden tool, because there were consequences for this kind of behavior, both in this life and the next. He knew that God is with him and helps him. Unlike most of us today, divided and desperate, this medieval ancestor of ours had a real community. He belonged to something greater than himself, the people who could help and protect him, and to whom he himself had certain commitments. He knew what real happiness is, living most of his days in toil and hardships. He could really appreciate a feast, or a festival, or a fair. For us, who never knew a shortage of anything, and who don't draw upon religion for meaning, even such great celebrations as Christmas or Easter are nothing more than another reason to indulge in even more gluttony than usual. One might say there was a lot more brutality and violence in the life of this hypothetical ancestor of ours, and that will be true. Yet even this is not something exclusively negative. Yes, a free farmer somewhere in eastern Anatolia during the so-called Dark Ages saw a lot more violence than we could ever imagine. After all, the whole region was the house of war and was annually raided by the Arabs. goods were stolen, men killed, women and children taken as slaves, and so on. Yet, at the same time, this led to the creation of a sturdy and resilient warlike population that was capable of not only resisting these raids, but also in the future of striking back, while at the same time, when the successes of the imperial army pushed the border eastwards and made the region safe again, the population, which now only paid taxes instead of supplying actual warriors, after centuries of peace, became meek and docile, and was unable to put up a proper resistance to the invading Turks in the 11th century. Thus, one might say that even the brutality and hardships of a medieval borderland can be perceived as something positive, something necessary. In the end, our medieval ancestors always put up a good fight when an invader was coming, which one can hardly say about us today. Many of our kind, unacquainted with brutality of life and unaware of the harsh realities of human condition, welcome those whom in the previous centuries they would consider invaders. The brutality and harshness are necessary in order to mold a strong character. After all, you know what they say. Hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. And it was the strong men who kept the fire of the Roman civilization going. Despite all the failures, despite endless wars and invasions, or maybe because of them, Christian Roman civilization stood for another 1,000 years after the fall of the West. Great emperors such as Heraclius, Basil II, Alexius I, John III, and sturdy Orthodox people of the empire kept resisting the inevitable force of entropy for many centuries, giving modern Europe time to develop and prosper. After all, maybe there was something in their culture and circumstances that we should learn from. If you like this video, please like, share and subscribe. I thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.